Thank you for tuning into Inflection's crowdsourced recap. This session was all about school-wide scheduling for equity. Keep watching for key insights presented by Dr. Rachael George, a co-pilot with Inflection's coaching program, and team member Alexa Ashiel, a project manager at Inflection.
So as we're thinking about master scheduling, these are the four big dogs that I really like to think about. And I've done master schedules at the secondary level and at the elementary. So I'll make sure to balance those evenly. I do start with the contract requirements, right? That's our go-to Bible of what we're starting with when you're talking about the number of contacts, the number of sections that people could potentially have. And depending on your school, those might be within the collective bargaining agreement. They maybe can't or maybe aren't in there. I also always look at what's the total number of minutes that I can have for student contact because I want to completely maximize those because those are your two bookends. How big is my bookshelf? What does the contract say for how often and how much can we be interacting with kids? Because I want to maximize every single possible moment. The other big one is student needs. What are the student needs? And this comes from a couple different variety of perspectives. One, what's their academic need and what's their credit need? So when I'm thinking about credits, I'm looking at ninth grade on track. I'm looking at what are their core subject graduation requirements and how they're progressing. I'm also looking at internal measures for tracking student progress. Sure, we have ninth grade on track, but we also have completion rates, the F and the I rates or the pass rates. But really, at the middle school level, we should be tracking students progressively throughout the year with fall, winter, and spring data, along with formative checks. That's really solid at the elementary level, kind of about mediocre in the middle school level. And then that is an area of opportunity for growth at the high school level. So, what are the academic needs they have? The other piece is also from the behavior lens. What are the behavior needs that they might have to be able to help them be supportive and successful? That is something to consider as you're thinking about your master schedule. I know that's definitely has driven about whether I'm going to separate sixth grade and seventh grade from lunch, or I'm going to put sixth grade and eighth grade together, or those timings, or if there's going to be an overlap. I worked with an elementary principal earlier this year that they had to go to 3 lunches instead of 2, just based off the transition and the stress level that it was creating for students. So there is a social emotional lens to it too as well. And then the maximizing staffing levels is probably the biggest game changer. One of the pieces that I wish if I had a magic wand that I could take from secondary and move down to elementary is that cohesive 30,000-foot look at a master schedule to really look at it from a bird's eye view. What staff do I have available? What are their skill strengths? Where are the student needs? And how can I leverage those pieces? Oftentimes at the elementary, it's an itemized schedule based off the classroom teacher or at the grade level, but it's not a collective building wide schedule. And we really want to make sure that we're maximizing it. And I know that kind of sounds really silly and redundant, like, of course, but almost every single school that I've worked with across the nation, in my own district, and even as colleagues with other principals throughout the state of Oregon, there's always opportunities to leverage the folks that we have even more than what we currently do with some creative scheduling, creative groupings. And it's almost the analogy we talk and kind of joke a little bit about it of like we have an orange and we're making fresh homemade orange juice. And how much can we really squeeze that to really maximize it? Because what I can tell you, and you guys know, right? I'm speaking to the choir, that there's not a lot of candidates that are applying for our jobs, right? Staffing and filling those positions is a challenge. So the folks that we do have, we want to make sure we're using them wisely, effectively, and a system. When we can effectively maximize staffing levels, it's in the equivalent of having like you're going down a grocery aisle and depending on what the student needs are, you're pulling the different items off the shelf. You have a system and a structure to be able to do that. When you're not maximizing staffing levels and you don't have that system and structure, it's complete chaos when you have a new student come in with additional needs or something different. Or you're adding one more kid to the group because you're hand scheduling and it's just so customized. So really system structures to really help leverage that staffing component. And then the alignment. I think at the high school, you're by nature with graduation requirements, there's alignment within your ninth through 12th grade programs. But oftentimes there's not necessarily alignment between the transitions between eighth and ninth or fifth and sixth from that elementary to middle school level, or there's not alignment across grade levels. So I'll speak at the elementary level. Sometimes you have students for what they need and where they're at. They might need some other differentiated support that might not be at their grade level, in addition to the tier 2 support that they already receive. So when you create alignment across different grade levels and across your schools, it creates an increased opportunity for students to get even more support for what they need. So that way you can triple down or customize and really captivate on what their student interests are, where they're going to be successful at, and you're not just pigeonholed into one single option for them. And that sometimes when I talk with larger districts, that's sometimes the downfall when there is an alignment is that they're like, this is the one program at the one time of the day that they have. And otherwise, if they can't find success in that, I don't know what to do. And when you have alignment and you have continuity across all your grade levels and all your classes, that option is completely blown out of the water. You now have like 10 to 15 options instead of just one, even at small schools with limited staffing. Also, when you're looking at maximizing your staffing levels, that also creates further alignment and further opportunities. So master scheduling, in my opinion, truly makes or breaks your student outcomes when it comes to your building. And when I've worked with struggling schools that are minority majority schools, rural schools, ones that have been in school improvement mode, one of the first things that we look at is their school-wide schedule. And the thought process of it is you need to have a system and structure to really be able to help support and respond to students and what their needs are. And again, it's about the students and what their needs are, not about what our perception of it is or about what we really enjoy teaching. You typically see that sometimes when you're asking teachers about what their options are or what they prefer to be able to teach during elective times, specifically at the middle school. I'd love to be able to teach blah, blah, blah. Well, that's awesome, but like no one's signing up for your crochet class. I'm thinking maybe we probably need to go with something else. But it really needs to tie back into your mission and vision and your outcomes for students. So, thinking about elementary versus secondary, one of the things that I told you I wish I had a magic wand for this. Secondary, I love like those master boards, like the master scheduling boards with the magnetic little tabs that we're moving around. I have some friends that just absolutely are obsessed with them. I also love the spreadsheets, but carry down into elementary is really looking at it being school wide and having consistency about where are those transition times, where are those start times, what are our expectations for when instruction is starting, when are we having those lunches, and then when are those intervention time blocks or those core classes, and how are we also ensuring that we don't have any barriers or we're not um, putting people into positions where they're no longer able to access perhaps some of the electives that they're interested in or some of the accelerated classes that they need, or perhaps an intervention class because they have an ELL support class and a reading lab class, and the list goes on. So really trying to look at instead of just the individual schedule, but that whole building one. When you're looking at some of the things to get started with, and I love that we're talking about this in January because these are good things to really kind of marinate on and think about as you head into the next couple months. Because the master schedule, as you know, this is something that you want to revisit every year. It's something that you want to get collective input you want it to be collaborative with all the different folks that are within your building, probably with a committee, connecting with students, parents, and others so they can understand the rhyme and reason. And it should be centered around your vision, mission, and what your purpose is within your building. And that does vary. Perhaps if you're like an IB school, like you mentioned here, that might be one of the driving forces that you really want to make sure that you're putting front and center within your schedule. Or if it's CTE, we have a significant amount of CTE options that are at our high school. We want to make sure that those, and if you take 2 or more CTE classes in our district, the grad rate for you is like 99%. So we want to make sure we have those options for folks. So we want to make sure that we're considering all those different pieces. But we want to also consider what do the students want? What are they interested in, especially when we're looking at potentially post high school graduation? If you're at the middle school, what are some of their interest levels? What are some teasers that we can expose them to that maybe can put them on a pre CTE track? It was fascinating when we opened up the option to be able to take Spanish for high school credit at the middle school and even some of the different like pre classes that you would take at the high school level, they were completely filled in a moment's notice at the middle school level. Kids were so interested in it, which was really, really exciting and fascinating. And so looking at how and what our students interested in is completely vital. I think also connecting with your families and your community about what their values are is very, very important too as well. If you're in the state of Oregon, this ties really nicely into your integrated plan where you're looking for community outreach and understanding about what their values are and where and how you're spending your money. So getting that input, getting that interest is number one. You're also then, besides thinking about the contract, because remember, those are the rules that you're playing by, rules of engagement, if you will, you're going to think about what those state requirements are. So the interesting piece at the elementary level is that not necessarily at the state level do you have core subject minute requirement, but your district might. And if your district doesn't, that's worth a conversation, either at your building level or at your district. So for example, we have 90 minutes of core reading that's expected at our elementary schools. 30 minutes of that core 90-minute reading block is small group reading, which is differentiated support. In addition, you also have 60 minutes of math instruction. So as you're thinking about building your master schedule, what are those common expectations? When you don't have a common expectation at the elementary school about your common number of minutes for each subject area that's being taught, you have a wide variety of quality of educational experience that are given. Pretend you have twins, right? You have one student in one class and the other in the second class. One kid's getting 30 minutes of reading or 40 minutes while the other one is getting 90 minutes. Do you think they're going to have different outcomes? 100%. So when you're thinking about creating equitable outcomes, when you're thinking about access, those are key pieces that you need to have some conversations around. At the secondary level, a lot of those are already earmarked for you because of the way your master schedule and your school-wide schedule is done, where you're looking at what are your class periods and how long are they. And there's always a fantastic debate, and I love it. Like probably the best Friday night ever to debate master schedules about traditional block schedule, like traditional schedules versus block, um, is the length of period where you find the most effectiveness in terms of the outcomes for students. And then also, how do you effectively teach a block schedule? Because many people think the block schedule is going to be like, whoa, the big savior for everything, and your outcomes are going to be completely different. But the piece that is often omitted is how do you actually teach effectively during a block schedule? Because oftentimes, if you leave out the professional development, you have teachers and staff that will just give additional time for work, or they won't give homework, and they just elongate it instead of really looking for more active engagement, more continuous feedback like processes. So things to be thinking about. You also want to be thinking about your seat minute requirements that you have for Division 22, and then also your college credit options, or your dual credit or your IB. So whether you're IB, whether you're an AP school or a dual language that's rolled all the way up, there's a lot of different pieces that you want to be considering, but that's that layer that you're adding in within that contract piece. You're also looking, this goes back to the contract, that third bullet, identifying available time. So I try to maximize the master schedule, the school-wide schedule. I'm really working hard to change my language on that, to shift from master schedule to school-wide. So if you hear me going back and forth between the two, know that I'm striving and really working towards using school-wide for my language. So thanks for having some understanding and grace with that. So available time. So we're looking at, when does the school day start? What's that transition into class? How can we minimize or shorten that? How can we also leverage maybe support staff or admin to really help with that transition? So then as soon as students walk in the door, they're ready and able to go back into the classroom. How quick does that transition look like leaving the school? Specifically at the elementary level, I often see elementary teachers taking a significant amount of time transitioning kids into the classroom, and it's not even like with a community circle meet and greet, along with packing up. One time I watched an elementary classroom take 30 minutes to pack up, 30 minutes that we could have spent on writing instruction. And when you continuously have that 5 days a week, that's a significant amount of time. So what does that look like from start to finish? What does it look like when you're transitioning from groups? What does it look like when you're transitioning between class periods? That's also something to play with too if you're trying to really maximize your student contact time is, do you really truly need 5 minutes for passing period between fifth and sixth period or between each of them? You know, is 3 adequate? That also is something that I would make sure that you're gathering student input on too as well and having them a part of that data collection process. I'd also really encourage you to think about what are some of the barriers. So whenever I would do a secondary schedule, I would always make sure, because we had shared band, some of those shared classes make it a little bit harder. And that is one of the barriers, right? Especially when you're small or you have a class size of 1 or 2 or even 5 for some of the advanced placement classes. What are the barriers? And our kids that are in an intervention track or need additional support through English as a second language or special education, do they still have options throughout the day to still have access to some of the fantastic course offerings throughout the day? The other piece is if they're able to then exit out of that, do they still have other options to then enter into other effective classes that they have interest in instead of just getting put into a study hall or an independent study? We want to look at all the different demographics within our students to make sure that they have equal access. Think about different language options, think about different academic levels, both high, like the, what am I thinking? Like for advanced placement, and also students that perhaps need a little bit of pre-teaching with it too as well. And then finally, staffing schedules. Really want you to be thinking about how do you align to the student need. This was a challenge and is a challenge, I think, that I've had at every level that I've been a building principal at, is that the staffing needs need to be flexible, especially as you're looking at year to year based off what your student need is. And I'll give you a specific example. Uh, Sometimes in kindergarten, we like to have an EA in there because we think it's super helpful to help all kindergarten kids. But maybe your enrollment's down, which it is within the state of Oregon, and across the nation, at least on the West Coast. So then as your kindergarten numbers go down within your class, are you truly needing an EA if you have a class size of 19? It's probably a different story than when you originally had a class size of 19 or 30. That also comes to play of, hey, maybe you're in a co-teaching model, and maybe this EA was used to pushing in during a 7th grade core reading class for language arts. Maybe that's no longer where that need is. Maybe it's now math. How then do we shift and structure that EA schedule or IA schedule to really be where the kid needs? So things to be thinking about is that having that school-wide schedule isn't just really truly about the time, but it's really weaving it with kids at the center, and it's really looking at the intervention and enrichment, but it's also looking at that pathway to success. And success for students looks very differently from student to student. Back like 10 years ago, the push was really you need to enroll in college, and now it's really, I appreciate it at least, that it's what's your post-secondary, what's your plan, whether it's a trade school, whether it's gainfully employed within the first 2 years in a successful area that you find happiness in, whether it's through college or a 2 year, but really trying to find that pathway to success and aligning it from that K-12 continuum is completely vital. And if you're just at that secondary level, 7 through 12, I think it's also reaching out to some of that the incoming districts that feed into your system too as well. Being a secondary principal, I always felt like I was downstream trying to really triage and fix things. And that was one of the beautiful things as being an elementary principal, is that now I was upstream and really got to help set that course for success. So having that alignment is vital. So some different things as you're thinking about your schedule, because like Joanne said, it's messy and you might get a messy schedule where you're like, this kind of fits, but it doesn't quite fit everything. Here are some different things to think about. And some of you that are at the secondary level, you're like, yeah, this is a no-brainer. But if you're at the elementary level, these might be some different pieces for you to think about too, because there's some validity to it. So even if you're at the secondary level, even if you're at the high school, where you are playing the class credit game, trying to figure out how are we going to provide intervention time for students is still, it's still there, right? And what we struggle with is whether we're going to put a kid into a class for remediation, but they're going to get an elective and now they can't take a CTE class or a college class. So how do we still make sure that they're passing the classes that they're in? So be thinking about your flexible schedule throughout the school day. This could be potentially looking at advisory or houses, so then you have that customized time. It can also be looking at how do you leverage success coaches, or transition coaches, if you will, along with enrichment. So when I was a middle school principal, we had intervention times, we had enrichment times, we had elective times that were built into our school-wide schedule. But in addition, we also had kids that were coming in not able to read, over 80% of our students. And we can't put all of those students into an intervention or enrichment class. We really couldn't. We needed to find success within those core subject areas. So one of the things that we did was we created some extended learning opportunities. And so Monday through Friday, kids for 30 minutes prior to going to lunch had a flexible group time where, depending on if the language arts teacher needed some additional time and support to go help Rachel, because I was absent all last week and I need to get caught up, or hey, maybe I need to get retaught a specific standard so I can retake a test. I went over to that class. So it was flexible in the moment and it was outside the course classes that were offered throughout the day. And if you were all caught up, all ready to go, rocking and rolling, there were additional enrichment opportunities for you throughout the school with a variety of different staff. It was all hands on deck. It was creative scheduling, EAs, educational staff, licensed staff, all of the admin were helping support this lift. So then that way we could do some creative, flexible times for providing additional intervention or enrichment. Another option is catch-up Fridays. You see this a lot in PLC work. It pretty much is like a master schedule on an assembly-wide approach where you're on an assembly schedule, but instead of going to assemblies, you are headed over to make sure that you have all your work caught up. This is highly effective at the high school level. Worked with a handful of schools in Colorado where they saw phenomenal gain within their student performance by providing that flexibility on Fridays to make sure they had all their stuff dialed. It helps support their pass fail rate along with their attendance. And for folks that were caught up, there was an incentive for them to be able to go do something fun and exciting. The other thing to really think about is you're supporting schedules for all students. How are ELL and SPED students being supported, especially if you're looking at a co-teaching model or a pull-out model, if you will. These are some things to think about as you're biting off this piece and you're having some conversations, but really putting, as you're doing your school-wide schedule, collaborative planning time for teachers, that's a key piece, especially if you're shifting some of your models for how you're delivering instruction, or you're really looking at some flexible groupings with PLCs or grade level teams. What is the flexibility and adaptivity for students based off their need? Do we have some intervention and enrichment blocks? I'd even encourage secondary, specifically the high school, to really reflect and ponder this, whether it's the class, which I know that that's a challenge when you're playing the course in the class credit game, but thinking about some flexible time within the school day to really get kids what they need. Equity and inclusion is a key piece. I think we also need to make sure that we're mindful about professional development needs, whether that's through early release, late start, or building in integration within staff meetings. We need to make sure that we're giving folks constant feedback and support as we're growing and adapting to a master schedule, school-wide schedule that maybe they've historically been comfortable with and felt like it works for them. Thinking about those seamless transitions, I think naming it, also knowing when you're making some of these shifts, if you're blowing it up, if you will, that it might be a little rocky, asking and reaching out to staff of what do you need? How can I help this be more smooth for you? How are things going is key. We made a really large transition with how we do PE across our district this last year. And we were worried about what the transition would look like. People were nervous. So we made sure that we came back around and met with folks and did a check-in. How's it going? How does it feel? And ironically, it ended up being a little bit better than what people originally anticipated. Also be thinking about that compliance with policies and requirements, whether that's contract language within your district or state requirements. And then the piece that we really want to be thoughtful about is community input. What are the values and the goals within the school-wide community, both inside and outside of the doors, with truly putting students at the center.
Thanks for watching. For more resources on school-wide scheduling for equity, visit portico.inflection.org and be sure to keep an eye out for our next crowdsource.